this accident happened. This is so unfair. I can't believe that driver did this to me. And what I was not having a conversation about was the fact that the accident happened. There are definitely times where Lynn struggled with reaching me deep down inside, because there are moments where I would cry. I would just break out in tears because I was so frustrated.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Heart Healthy Hustle Show. I'm your host, Jonathan Frederick. Today, we have a very special guest coming to us from Bergen County, New Jersey. We're with Michael O'Brien. Michael's harrowing story is one that will move you, will motivate you, it will push you, and inspire you. So tune into this incredible story as we speak with Michael. Michael is the founder of Peloton Coaching and Consulting and the author of Shift, Creating Better Tomorrows. Michael's story will captivate you, so listen up and hear how he turned tragedy into triumph. Michael, I'm happy to have you. Welcome.
Thanks, Jonathan. Awesome to be on your show, and to your listeners out there, a hearty hello. I'm ready to dive deep with you, man.
Fantastic. So we start out the show with a favorite success quote or a saying you live by. So share with us what you got and what it means to you.
Great. Well, I'll give you two. One is from when I was 10 years old as a little leaguer playing baseball. Learned this one from my little league coach. When the going gets tough, the tough get going. It's one of my favorite quotes. To me, it's the essence of resilience and grit and determination. The other quote, though, that many people who follow my blog will know, that I end every blog, every video with the line, "Have fun storming the castle." And if anyone out there knows The Princess Bride, a classic movie, they'll know that line. And for me, the line means a lot, but it means go out, make things happen, have fun doing it. And it's really sort of a mantra for my whole life.
Yeah, classic movie, Princess Bride. I think most people have seen that. If not, you need to go see it today.
Absolutely. It's got to be on your must-watch list.
Michael, I want to hear your story. If you could go back in time to 25-year-old Michael and where he is at in life, take us through some things that you were going through at that time.
When I was 25, I was in Washington, D.C., and I just started my professional career in sales. I'd graduated from James Madison University, and I put out my best piece of content to date. All right. Nothing beats this piece of content. So way back then, I was looking to meet someone. So before eHarmony, before Match.com, I put an ad in the back of the Washington City paper. And through that ad, I found my wife. And this May, we will celebrate 25 years of marriage together. So of all the things I've posted, all the blogs I've written, that is by far the best piece of content. I did that ad, and so I went after a very, very niche audience, and I found Lynn. So that was.
I have to know what this ad contained, and how you mastered copyright so early in your career. One, I acknowledge you for the initiative and the hustle. It's fantastic. And then congratulations on 25 years, by the way. So this clearly worked. So what is this ad, and how do I do it?
Well, so now I look at the ad, man, and I'm like, oh my, that ad was so cheesy. And in fact, for our wedding, we turned it into a wedding favor. So we turned it into a magnet. So all of our guests that attended our wedding back then, there were definitely some cheesy lines. So the hook, though, the line that caught her attention was the very last line.
What,
and it was
the intention of the ad male seeking female, or was it I'm confused?
Well, yes. The essence of the ad was single white male in search of single white female. And so I didn't, much like eHarmony or Match.com. And I was really looking for someone to hang out with. I wasn't necessarily looking to find someone that would become a girlfriend and later we would get married and spend 25 years together. I was just looking for someone to go to concerts with.
This is really cool. So this is you were kind of letting people know you're looking for a girlfriend, and you put it in the paper?
Pretty much, yeah. So Washington, D.C., and the people in New York will know the Village Voice. So Washington, D.C. has this paper called the City Paper. It was a free weekly paper, and it had quirky little stories about what was happening in D.C. It wasn't necessarily political, but in the back section, it had all the entertainment. So this is, keep in mind, this was before social media. So if you want to check out a concert or go to a museum, it would list all the things you could do. The very back of the paper had all these personal ads. And so we would get together, my buddies and I, and lot of the in our early 20s would get the paper and would read these ads over like a few margaritas or a few beers, and we'd be like, who the hell puts an ad in the paper? And there was one day, I was, because you don't put your name there. It wasn't like Michael O'Brien is lonely and searching for a girlfriend. It was all anonymous. So I was like, you know what? It's anonymous. People are doing it. You know what? I'm going to write an ad and I'm going to see who responds. And maybe I'll meet someone to go to a concert with, because I love going to music concerts. So like, I just want to go, hang out with someone at the 930 Club, which was a popular concert hall in DC. And what harm could it? No one's going to know it's me. So let's write an ad. And
is that the entirety of the ad's contents?
So basically the ad was 25. And I said like, hey, I'm into cycling and running and going out and staying in. But the last line of the ad, Jonathan, was written this way: not afraid to express her opinions about today's events. And so my wife, Lynn, read that and she was like, oh, that's me. I'm going to call this ad. So she had never called an ad before, and I had never placed an ad before. And she called on the very last day the ad was running. The whole ad cost me like probably $1 to place. And it cost her like, I think $8 to leave the message because she had to call a 900 number.
I'm really interested to pull this thread a little bit more because it's just an interesting story. I have tried eHarmony. It was a year or two ago for like 3 months, and it was just terrible. But anyway, I also downloaded Tinder to experience the thrill of why so many people my age are addicted to these dating apps. And, there's some great relationships that come from those apps. I'm not going to knock them. I don't use them because I believe that for my life, it would be a big not conducive to my personal growth or time spent. So I don't use them. But this is almost like, my point is culturally, they're very widely used and accepted. This is interesting. So back then, the way that you would like check this stuff out would be in the back of these papers.
Yeah. So back, like I think most like major cities had like the Washington City paper, as I mentioned earlier, in New York City, the Village Voice. Imagine on the West Coast. So it'd be like the Entertainment Weekly. So this was 1992. So social media was not a thing. Yeah. In the back, you would just put ads. And
so you actually were able to like set your preferences in terms of like ethnicity or like what you're interested in. And, oh, by the way, hopefully you express yourself openly as well. So your wife was intrigued by that.
Yeah, definitely. So for me, like living in DC, what happened was I came off of dating someone who really didn't have an opinion about what was happening in the world. So we lived in Washington, D.C., and in D.C., like politics, it's a thing. It's like a sport, right?
Oh, totally.
So I was dating her. I was like, well, what do you think about this? She was like, I don't know. I don't care.
Did she just not follow politics?
Yeah, she just wasn't into that type of stuff. But I wanted someone who had a point of view. I didn't necessarily have to agree with her. I just wanted someone who was like a little lively. And so I put that line in there. So what happened is that all the women who saw the ad would call a 900 number, which was a voicemail box, and leave a message basically sharing more about who they were. And then I called them back. And then from there, you go out on a couple dates. You see where that goes. And for Lynn and me, it's going on now for 25 years, which is pretty remarkable.
That is remarkable. That really is the word to describe it, I would say as well. Remarkable. That's quite interesting. And thanks for sharing that. I appreciate it.
No problem.
I want to jump into your story now, Michael. I'd love to hear more about your background, about the last bad day, how you transitioned that tragedy into triumph, how, then into writing your book called Shift and how that became so successful.
Yeah, no problem, Jonathan. I always love sharing. Well, if people are really curious about seeing the full ad is in my book Shift.
Awesome.
So I put the whole ad in there and how Lynn and I met. But going back to my early 20s, Lynn and I got married in 94, and I was doing what I thought society wanted me to do. So when I was growing up, I didn't necessarily know what my purpose was or passion. Sometimes we get those confused. And I was just sort of following what I thought, again, what society wanted me to do, like go to high school, graduate, go to college, graduate, get a gig, find a girl, marry the girl, start a family, and climb up the corporate ladder. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I want to interject. You said you went to JMU?
Yeah.
And then after that, you graduated. Now you're living in DC.
Yep.
Okay. And what did you study and what were you working in?
I studied marketing and economics when I was at JMU. And then I got my very first gig, my professional gig. I was selling copiers and facsimiles.
Wow.
Fax machines. So which were huge back then. They weighed like 50 pounds.
Oh, yeah.
I had a job. Basically my territory was Capitol Hill. And then right around 92, I got a job in the pharmaceutical industry. And that's where my career in the pharmaceutical industry started as a sales rep. And that's when I met Lynn. And I didn't necessarily design my life. There's an old quote by this guy named Zig Ziglar. So like a guru, he has since passed away, but he had this saying of living a do, have, be lifestyle. And I'll explain what that is. So the do is you work your tail off. You're just doing a whole bunch of stuff in order to have a whole bunch of stuff, the material possessions, and then you'll be happy. So the conditionalizing of your life, like I'll be happy when. And up until my last bad day, I did a lot of that. I felt like I'll be happy when I get that new job. I'll be happy when I get that new promotion. I'll be happy when I buy that new car. I'll be happy when this meeting is over. And so I was doing a lot of doing and trying to pursue a lot of having. And then I thought once I had all that stuff, I'd finally be happy. And as fast forward to 2001, the year of my last bad day, I was now Lynn and I had been married 7 years. Our daughters were really young. Elle was 3.5 years old. Grady was only 7 months old. And I was sort of chasing happiness. And I was doing a lot of Supermaning. I thought I had to be Superman at work because I was the leader at work. Yeah. I also thought I had to be Superman at home because I was the provider for our family. Yeah. We had since moved from Washington, D.C. up to New Jersey for a corporate gig in my company to sort of take over marketing for our company's biggest product. So a lot of pressure, a lot of visibility, but I was pouring the stress inside of me, trying to restrict it or repress it. And on the surface, I was like, yeah, we're all good. Everything's fine. I'm good. I'm right. That's how I tried to portray myself. But inside, there was a lot of stress from just sort of chasing happiness. On July 11th, 2001, I had my last bad day. I went out to a company meeting out in New Mexico. Many of the listeners will probably been through a meeting like this. You fly out on Monday, you fly back on Friday, and in between, they try to torture you with PowerPoint. And I decided to bring my bike out because I've been an avid cyclist since my high school days.
So street cycling?
Yeah, mainly road. I did a little mountain biking in college, that type of stuff. Cool. So I brought my bike out and I thought, all right, I'm going to be really smart. I'm going to go out to New Mexico, a state that I had never been to. I'll cross New Mexico off the states I've ridden my bike, and I'll get some exercise and avoid the hotel gym, and I'll be really fresh for our meetings, right? It'll be invigorating and energetic and all that stuff.
Yeah, I don't think you're a type A personality. I don't think so.
No, not at all. Not at all. No. I'm totally not, Jonathan. What makes you say that? So then on the fourth lap of that morning, I had a simple loop. I went out the back road of the hotel, the service road, and then up the main entrance. It was about a 2-mile loop. And on the fourth lap that morning, I came around a bend, and a Ford Explorer was heading right towards me. It had crossed fully into my lane. Oh my goodness. It was going about 40 miles an hour, and I had no time to avoid it. And I remember almost everything about that morning. I remember the sound of me hitting his grill, smashing into the windshield. I popped a hole in it, the screech of his brakes, and the thud I made as I came to the asphalt below.
I'm just kind of picturing that scene. Accidents are horrific. What happened next?
Well, so as your listeners and you would imagine, I got knocked unconscious, but the EMTs arrived pretty quickly. So totally fortunate. There were EMTs at the hotel. So they came to the scene really quickly. And when I regained consciousness, I asked the question only another cyclist can really appreciate. I asked them, hey, how's my bike? And so they looked at me, they're like, what? I was like, yeah, how's my bike? And I was really trying to just manage the situation. Yeah. And I try to use humor to cut tension. And I was like, we need some we need to cut some tension because even the thought of moving was painful. Like I couldn't move. I was in a whole bunch of hurt. And I remember that morning just trying to will myself not to fall asleep. I thought, it was like basically a mantra, like, Michael, stay awake, don't fall asleep, stay awake, don't fall asleep. Because I thought if I fell asleep, I would lose control over the situation. As crazy as that sounds, because I had no control over the situation, but I was trying to control things, which was a little bit of my identity prior to this accident, trying to chase the happiness and all that jazz. And they called the trauma helicopter to take me to the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque, a 19-minute flight. And I really didn't want to get on the helicopter because back then I was a nervous flyer. I was like, I've never been on a helicopter. Can't we just take the ambulance? And they said, no, it's too far away. We need to get you to the hospital right away.
Did they tell you at this point what had happened to you?
No. And to, I think, a large degree, they didn't know. So what had happened is I fractured a whole bunch of everything. But the big injury that created the life and death situation is when the left femur shattered. It just exploded.
Oh.
It lacerated the femoral artery of my left leg.
Whoa.
So in essence, I was bleeding out in the middle of the desert. The doctors later told Lynn, my wife, had I been 10 years older or not in shape, I certainly would have died before I got to the hospital. That very first surgery, I needed 34 units of blood product. It's a massive amount of blood. But I remember getting on the helicopter and making a commitment to myself, like, if you live, Michael, life is going to be different. You're going to stop chasing happiness. And I remember every minute of that 19 minutes, that flight, I remember it all. I met my anesthesiologist and we had the first surgery that lasted about 12 hours. And then the next 4 days, I don't remember a thing at all. And I was in the ICU at the time.
Do you think those seeds for a shift in your life were being planted while you were in the helicopter ride? Because you were saying, if I live, then I'm going to stop chasing happiness. Explain to us what you mean by that and what you mean by your last bad day.
I think the seeds were definitely, that was a major seed that was planted. But I think there were moments in time, the accident was a big wake-up call. I think there were moments in time before that I wasn't mindful in my own life. And I think there's a lot of folks nowadays that are not mindful of their own life. They're just going. They're doing that whole do, have, be, as opposed to just showing up and being present and being aware of their life. So I think there were a lot of seeds that were planted, if you will, prior to my accident, right. But I just blew past them because I was busy doing stuff. And then the accident came and I was like, all right, we're going to give you one big pause button to reflect on your life and for you to have some time to think about what type of life do you want, Michael? I think that was the real important thing. But the whole chasing happiness was like, I was never really as happy as I could have been. Like I was happy in the moment. Like I got promoted. And then I realized, oh, wow, like when you get promoted, more levels equals more devils. And then I went back to chasing happiness again. Or I bought that car and I was like, oh, yeah, I'm happy until someone else drove up to work with a nicer car. And I was like, the whole comparison thing that we do, and especially nowadays with social media, so easy to do. And that's sort of, those seeds were planted and then they needed a little bit of watering, right? The right type of fertilizer. So when I came out of the ICU, the doctor started to tell me about my accident.
Yeah.
So the driver had a revoked license. So in a lot of ways, the accident should not have happened, but it did, right? He should not have been driving that day, but he was driving. And they started sharing like, hey, you're going to have a lifetime of limitations and dependencies and more surgeries. And life got different, but not in the way that I wanted it to. It got really dark. I got angry and bitter and revengeful. And I sort of stayed in this funk until they flew me back to New Jersey. And I realized, and this is an old Viktor Frankl quote, that we are not defined by our life events, but we're defined by our response to our events in our lives, in so many words or less. And I also realized, and this is the whole like last bad day labeling, that all the events in our lives are neutral until we decide to label them. And in that moment of reflection, when I was in my hospital bed and also on the rehab mat, that I realized that I could label July 11, 2001 in a lot of different ways. And I decided I was going to label it, that's going to be my last bad day. Like every day beyond that, there's going to be struggle. I'll have emotions like sadness and challenge and frustration. But at the end of every day, I will have a practice of gratitude.
Yeah.
And as long as Lynn's in my life and my girls are in my life, like how can I label the day as being bad? Right. So I just made a determination of getting really, like just really aware, keenly aware that any event in my life, I can choose the label that I place on it. And I got smarter about the labels I was picking in my life to help propel me forward, to help me have the career and the life and the relationships I wanted to have in my life.
Let's step back for a second. I like how you said the accident gave you a pause button to reflect. It's so key because a lot of times, and I'm not saying you were responsible for the accident at all, but in terms of the way you were living being so different after your accident and after your recovery, prior to your accident, you were kind of going at life a little differently. And then after the recovery, you decided no more bad days. That will be the last one. Going to appreciate everything from here on out, change your perspective and everything. For anyone listening who hasn't gone through any traumatic event, they never had a tragic loss to a loved one or a friend, family member, or they never had a bad accident. These pauses in life, I feel like if it's not an accident that you're not responsible for, eventually one will manifest that you are largely responsible for. For example, the heart attack, things like, John Maxwell, you mentioned Zig Ziglar. John Maxwell talks about how he had a heart attack and that changed a lot for him because it hurt so bad. And after that, he was already like a champ, he wasn't like some bum. He was crushing it. And then he had a heart attack and that even amped up and changed some things in his life too. It's like these pause buttons are so impactful for our lives. You don't want to have to go through a tragic event to have a pause button. So if you can, talk to the people who have had a traumatic thing happen in their life that they actually didn't use it as a pause button, but decided that will be a perpetuating vicious cycle of anger, bitterness, depression, resentfulness, have allowed it to really put a cloud over their life as opposed to using it as a pause button that will catalyze their growth. Could you talk about that early darkness of your recovery?
Yeah, Jonathan, totally. And I think whether someone's gone through something traumatic like I went through or haven't done so, which is great. I share my story because I want people to have more awareness in their life so they can maybe, prevent it from happening in the first place. So I think going back to like people who may have had it and they made a different type of shift in the early days of my recovery, as people were telling me about my lifetime of limitations and dependencies and more surgeries and all that jazz. And in sort of in the spirit that we go where we go where our eyes go, I was starting to point my attention to sort of like all the things I didn't have anymore, all the things I couldn't do. And when we point our eyes in that direction, we tend to see more of our limitations, which then just adds to the frustration or the anger. And I realized that wasn't serving me and my overall purpose. Like what I realized along the way was I just wanted to become the best father and husband and person I could be. And so sitting in that stew, that's like toxic funk, wasn't helping me move forward, right? So I decided to hit the pause button and realize that I could look at my situation completely different. And that's when I made that shift to say, okay, well, instead of looking at all the things I didn't have anymore or couldn't do, what can I see in my life that I still have and I still could do? And I consciously made the intention of looking at life through that lens. And so, in current times, we would describe that as looking at life through a lens of scarcity versus looking at life through a lens of abundance. Back when I had my accident in 2001, back then I was going off of like old Maxwell and old Zig Ziglar type of wisdom in order to like make that shift and try to find moments where I could pause in my life and just breathe and reflect. A lot of people also ask me like, well, I never went through something like you went through, Michael. Like, how am I supposed to change? And what I share with those folks is like, listen, we all have the ability to slow down, hit the pause button, again, breathe and reflect. I have something that little acronym that I use, Jonathan, called grabbing a PBR, which a lot of people are like Pabst Blue Ribbon. And I'm like, no, different type of PBR. Just pause, breathe, and reflect, and take these moments in our lives to get away from a little bit of the hustle, which is so important. Like, I am a fan of hard work and making the hustle happen, but I'm also a big believer in spending some time each day just in a moment of pause, in a moment of reflection, to say, hey, how do I want to show up in the world? Am I playing someone else's game? Because prior to my last bad day, I was doing what I thought society wanted me to do. I was sort of living by the rules of other people. Through my accident, my recovery, I realized through some awareness, some acceptance, and then action that I could live my own life on my terms. I could show up at work on my own terms. And I don't have to, the big part of that acceptance is not arguing with reality. So the early stages of my recovery, I was arguing with reality. Oh, this accident happened. This is so unfair. I can't believe that driver did this to me. And what I was not having a conversation about was the fact that the accident happened, right? Sometimes bad things happen to really wonderful people. We can argue all day long that it shouldn't happen that way, but all that does is it keeps that narrative going that doesn't fuel us, doesn't help us become the best possible person we can become. So once I got awareness about like what I wanted in my life, acceptance that my accident happened, then, and really only then, I was in a position to take action to create the life and the career that I truly wanted on my own terms.
Take us back to your story after you got out of the ICU, after you went through a bit of your rehab. Any aha moments during your rehab?
Change happens drip by drip, pedal stroke by pedal stroke.
Yeah.
So one of my mantras is creating better tomorrows. And that started after I had my big aha moment that I wasn't necessarily putting in all the effort I could. Like I still had some baggage from my accident. There was a scene or a rehab session I write about in my book where I was like, it was a lot of awareness all in one moment. And I realized, okay, we gotta change the game a bit. We gotta approach our rehab, approach my recovery, and approach my relationships differently. And then I made another determination that I was going to work hard today to create a better tomorrow. I was going to put in the work. And back then they would measure my rehab based on how far my legs could bend, like how far could my legs extend? Could I extend them fully? And could I touch my heel to my butt, right? Like a quadricep stretch.
Right.
And so we'd go into rehab, I'd get all warmed up, and they would literally sit on me, and then someone would push my leg as far as it could go. And they would use like a little measuring tool to measure the degrees of flexion. And it was like,
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was torture, right? But the thing is, every time I went into a rehab session, I was like, all right, we're gonna work hard to get one more degree of flexion. Like that 1 degree and a 1 degree the next day, and 1 degree the day after that, strung together, that's progress. Change can happen in lightning bolt moments. There's sometimes big change happens like right away, but the change that really matters, the change that's sticky, that sticks over the long haul, I think it happens pedal stroke by pedal stroke, using a cycling analogy, or drip by drip. And it takes the discipline. So, I made a commitment to like be disciplined on change. Now, the other thing I've learned is that change isn't linear, right? Recovery isn't linear, nor is life. So there are days where it's like everything's going awesome and you're making progress, and each week seems to be better than the previous week. And then you have a setback. And then you trip and you fall and you have a hiccup. And then the question is, do you get back up again? And then the next question after that, okay, you've gotten back up. Now do you go forward, right? So falling down is a part of life. Getting back up is part of resilience. Taking the next step forward, Well, that type of action, that's the type of action that creates real change. And I think I learned those valuable lessons through my recovery, not only when I was in the hospital, but when I came out and I regained my corporate life and future surgeries and all that jazz.
When you were going through some of the darker times, especially in the early days of recovery, did you struggle with letting people in, including your wife, your family, and your team of people that were trying to support you? Was it hard letting them help you and get inside your head?
It was, because I still had some old beliefs of like what the father and the husband and the leader at work, what those roles are supposed to do. And there are definitely times where Lynn struggled with like reaching me deep down inside, because there are moments where I would cry. Like I would just like break out in tears because I was so frustrated. And I really felt like, keep in mind, I was still now looking through life through a lens of abundance, but I'm still human. I still had moments where I was like, this is so frustrating. This is so hard. And who am I going to become? Like my identity, like as an athlete, was flipped on its head. My identity as a leader, as a person, like when you go through something like this, I'm like, gosh, who am I going to become? Back before my accident, I thought I would become like what society wanted me to become. And now there was this open playing field, which sounds awesome, but there are still moments of like real struggle.
Yeah.
There are still moments of pain. And even to this very day, like, there are things I can't do anymore. Like I can't run. I was a runner back in the day. I did the Boston Marathon. I can still ride my bike and I still race my bike, but I can have like a little tweak happen to me, like maybe overtrain, and that can set me back a few days. And I still have moments where that can be incredibly frustrating. What I've learned over the years though, is that I can shift out of those moments faster. Like those moments maybe years ago would last for like a week, maybe even a month, right? And now I make sure they only last for a few moments so I can move forward with action that can fuel me, that can help me get to the next level, whatever that next level is.
So you learn to adapt your exercise routines and things like that, I assume?
Yeah, I definitely have limitations because my left leg is shorter than my right. My left leg doesn't operate like my right one does. So I spend a lot of time.
Is that the one that shattered?
Yeah, the left leg shattered. The right leg was still broken in multiple places. So I still fractured the right leg and the right tibia. But the left leg was just brutal. Like, and the wicked cool thing about it is that I have some pretty freaking amazing scars that tell a wonderful story of grit and resilience. But I definitely have to spend more time like working on my core, working on my flexibility, just paying attention to those aspects. Now, I'm also 18 years older than the time of my accident. So for anybody who hasn't reached like 50 yet, when you get to 50, you got to pay more attention to those things, with or without an accident in your life.
Wow. I appreciate you sharing all that. You wrote a book called Shift. I'd love to ask you about the process of approaching that process and what did it actually tactically look like to start writing a book that meant so much to you and your life story?
Well, thanks for asking, Jonathan. I think the book, I have some post-traumatic 7th grade English feelings. So growing up, I wasn't necessarily the prize student. I was journaling through my recovery. I would take notebooks out and I would write down what was happening, my thoughts, my feelings. I would type them into my computer. So when I left my corporate job in 2014 and I started to share my story with a brand new set of folks, everyone was like, Michael, you have to write this book, about your story. Your story is really impactful. And I was like, yeah. And like intellectually, Jonathan, I knew enough about marketing to know that what they were telling me made sense. And I was like, yeah, all right. But I'd sit down at the keyboard and I would write a little bit and then I'd stop and then I'd write a little bit and then I'd stop. And I was like, this doesn't feel right. They were like, why aren't you writing this book? I'm like, it just doesn't feel right. I didn't want to write Shift because of all that. My story is my story. It's not a vehicle for speaking gigs. It's not a vehicle to make money. It's like my story. And I took a class with Seth Godin, his alt MBA, and that was like the final straw. I was like, I'm going to go into this alt MBA that Seth puts together, and I'm going to pressure test my story and really try to find out why I want to write it, or should I write it. And really early in that class, I found the reason. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to write this for my daughters who were too young at the time to remember pre-accident daddy.
Wow.
And I'm also going to write it for anybody going through a struggle or know someone going through a struggle. And I'm going to write it with those people in mind. And what I decided to do as well is that I didn't want my story to be like, I'm going to make money from this. We decided to give all the money away to charity. So all the proceeds go to an organization based in Chicago called World Bicycle Relief. And they help girls conquer the challenge of distance by giving them mobility. They give them a bicycle. So when someone reads Shift, I hope that they'll gain some pearls in it to help change their life and create a better tomorrow. But when they read it, when they pick up a copy, they go a long way in trying to change someone else's life halfway around the world, like in places like Kenya and Malawi and other countries where in rural parts of the world, these girls have to go to school by bike or by walking, and it's a 12-kilometer walk. And World Bicycle Relief comes in and gives them a bicycle. So they stay in school longer, they graduate, they marry later, they have smaller families, but more importantly, they have independence, they have economic vitality. And since I lost my mobility for a while during my recovery, I wanted to give back to an organization that promoted mobility. The key to having a strong Peloton, which is like my analogy for tribe, we're talking today, but there's a whole Peloton of people behind me, which starting with my wife.
I would love to transition into that, Michael. Can you talk to us about building a stronger Peloton? You wrote here, the team that transcends the individual. How can we do that in our lives, in our businesses? Because I understand at this point in my life, the power of community, the power of building a team, whether that's your personal life team, that's your business team. I'd love to hear about how to facilitate building a stronger Peloton. I think my biggest struggle in that area is that people may not think I need help, or that I'm not approachable because I'm always working and I never sleep, which is neither are true. But when you're very type A, people will view you in that way. So in 2018, I became much more aware of my approach to this area and became much more transparent in asking for true help. I'd love to hear your advice here and your expertise around the area of building a stronger Peloton.
Yeah, great question, Jonathan. And I love the fact that, last year in 2018, you started asking for help. I think that's a good place to start, that we all need assistance. We all need help or support, if we want to call it that. And for me, like I had so many people behind me helping me in my recovery, led by my wife, Lynn. In a lot of ways, Shift is a big love letter to her, right? Because without her, I'm not here today. So part of it is showing, to build a great Peloton is the value of empathy, to see what others see, to hear what others hear, and creating that space and holding that space for empathy in our lives, instead of judging someone's point of view as being incorrect because it's different than ours. We just try to sit with them and hear them out. And through that, we can have conversation that goes back and forth, where we really listen to connect with each other, listen to understand each other, as opposed to what happens, I think, in many corporate cultures. We just listen to reply to one another. We don't really acknowledge what the other person has to say. So in terms of growing a great Peloton, I think listening to connect and understand, which then leads to empathy, and also the courage and vulnerability. And this is something that I've had to learn along the way. And back when I was recovering, we didn't have Brene Brown doing TED Talks about vulnerability. Vulnerability is that step forward, even when we don't know what's on the other side of our action, right? So vulnerability isn't, opening ourselves up in a too much information, TMI type of way. It's about having the courage to be open to the possibility to say, hey, I'm I'm going to reach out to you, and I'm not really sure how you're going to respond, but I'm going to do so anyway. That can build some great connection. We all need help. And back before my accident, when I was playing Superman, I didn't think I needed any help. And I was pouring the stress inside. And eventually, literally and figuratively, it got knocked out of me. But when we can make our relationships about the greater us, like when we value we over me, that just helps build some safety in our relationships. And that safety, whether we're talking about our personal relationships or our romantic relationships or corporate relationships, having that safety to be empathetic, to listen, to be vulnerable, to have courage are so key to building that great network. And I think we need it more than ever, right? Because I think our phones, and not to hate on social media or phones, because I love both. I love my phone, and I think social media has a lot of value. But when we're not aware about how we use it, it can create a lot of loneliness where we feel isolated. And I think bringing us together, and especially when we have so many workforces out there, workplaces that have gone virtual, that taking steps as organizations to bring us closer together through listening and empathy and vulnerability can make such a big difference to our bottom line and to the type of work we're doing out there in the world.
Right on. So I touch on this sometimes. I love using technology and social media to facilitate connections, to connect with other people, as opposed to isolating myself. It's very doable. I've really found that in 2018 specifically, through Facebook, through Instagram, through emails, through podcasting. It's just really fascinating to see how you can find more connection with it. I've actually developed multiple new friendships. I'd love to hear, is there anything tactical that we can do to help build teams? Like, is there a specific type of question that we can ask people when we are looking for help in a certain area with how they can support us? Is there any way to go about that and more tactically?
So I'd say one step, if you're building teams, I think the initial onboarding of teams in any type of corporate environment is so key to really spend the time getting to know each other instead of, hey, welcome to the team, let's get going and get our stuff done, is spending the time to get to know the new hire that you have on your team, for them to get to know you as the boss. But I say the big thing as we get into the rhythm of work is around this, theme of awareness. When we see someone not necessarily showing up like they usually show up, is spending the time to ask the question like, hey, is everything all okay? Are we all good? Because can I give you an observation? Like, I notice like you don't necessarily seem yourself, right? And it comes from a place of not judgment. It comes from a place of care. A lot of times we're like, oh yeah, what's up with Bob? He doesn't seem like, himself today. We talk about Bob to other people, but we don't go to Bob and say, hey, buddy, are you okay? Is everything okay? And then he might say, yeah, I'm all good. And you could just say, hey, well, if there's ever a time where you need to chat, just let me know. I'm here for you.
Love it.
Just that exchange. If we did more of that.
That shows a lot of emotional intelligence, but it doesn't take a ton of effort to ask that question. So I love it. Yeah. So, Michael, let's transition now into the Heart Healthy Hustle round. I'm going to ask you a series of rapid fire questions. Are you ready?
I am ready. I'm limbered up.
So the first category is heart. What activity do you use, care for, and strengthen your internal character?
I spend a lot of time on my bike. So my bike now is a lot of my thinking time in terms of reflecting out how I'm showing up. And if I'm showing up in a way where I'm honoring my values and I'm making it about other people, am I leading basically with love? And I spend not every minute on my bike thinking about that, but during the course of the week, I usually have a ride where I just sort of think about that.
You set that intention before you start pedaling?
Yeah, like today is like, it won't be like a super intense workout. It's my time to just be outside, be on my bike. It's my time to sort of think about, hey, how am I showing up in the world? And am I showing up in the service to others and for others? And again, like leading with love, that we don't like to necessarily talk about at work, but it's so vital to create create meaningful change in people's lives.
You talk a lot about others' focus. Is there any, in this time of, reflection and really assessing your performance in that area of love, is there anything you do specifically for yourself, your internal character, personally?
I spend a lot of time working on my self-narrative, right? So it's our worst boss is usually ourselves. We get into like, I'm not like fill in the blank, I'm not enough, what have you. So I never did this prior to my accident, prior to my last bad day, but I spend some time now, sometimes it's through meditation. Sometimes it's just part of my habit now of really checking in with myself and taking time for myself to help me develop. Health is a value of mine, as your listeners probably will not be surprised by. So I make sure that I do things each day that will promote my health, because I know if I can have self-care and self-compassion, then I'm better for all the people around me. So I think there's value in serving and servant leadership, and I'm all about that. But I also think that we all do need some self-compassion, some self-care, self-development, so we can be better for those people around us, the people in our Peloton, if you will.
That's awesome. It's like, if you don't take care of yourself, then how can I expect you to take care of my business? Like, if you're serving a business.
Absolutely. It goes back to the warning, the safety warnings or safety procedures on every airline flight. Like, make sure you put your oxygen mask on first before assisting others. It's the same principle.
Health. How do you maintain your physical health and avoid burnout with living a fast-paced life?
Well, my bike, my core, my flexibility. I even work on my breathing, which is a big thing for me in 2019. My cycling and just being athletic and being outdoors, which I think more people could serve themselves really well, just being outside, being connected with nature, all that fuels my health. What I'm also trying to work on a bit more in 2019 is being more mindful as an eater. I'm guilty, like anyone else, of grazing, a little mindlessly grazing and sort of picking at things. And what I'm trying to do this year is be more mindful of the foods I'm consuming. I'm generally a healthy eater, but if there's a brownie around or a cookie around, and that's not to say you can't have a brownie every now and again. I'm just trying to be a little bit more mindful of my grazing habits as I go forward.
Right on. What are some things that you enjoy eating?
So I'm a big like protein smoothie kind of guy. So I, combine fruit. Sometimes it's just peanut butter. And I do that. But I try to really go after whole foods. So I am lucky that Lynn, my wife, is an excellent chef. So she's also a fantastic baker of bread. So I'm not necessarily like a no carbs kind of guy. As a cyclist, I need some carbohydrates. But we try in our household to eat just real food, not processed. Real fish, right? Real bread, grains, vegetables, fruits, you name it. And I try to consume a lot of that. And I try to stay away from the processed stuff. And I also try to stay away from sugar. And I think sugar is something that we can get really addicted to. It's easy to consume a whole bunch. And I don't think that's the right type of energy for us if we really want to be at our best.
For hustle, what's your main motivation for doing what you do? For me, I believe what I'm doing is a calling and that it's a purpose. It's not just a passion or anything. It's something I feel ethically and morally obligated to fulfill. But I wonder, what's your main motivation for doing what you do and hustling to the max of your potential?
Yeah, great question. Well, a lot of people told me, and I totally believe this, that on July 11th, I lived for a reason. And I think one of the reasons is to share this story, to help others, find more awareness in their lives and into action that can really help them create the best possible life. I like to say, when I talk about my leadership academy, that I want to help you become the wealthiest person you know, starting from the inside out. I want you to have an awesome career, get as high as you can possibly get in your career up that corporate ladder. But I want to make sure that you do it on your own terms, that you have the joy and the happiness and fulfillment out there. I really do want to, pursue work that helps other people avoid their SUV, whatever that SUV might be. And I think if we can show up that way, have great careers, but have the happiness and wealth inside, then the world just gets better. And that's why I do what I do. And I work all the time at it. We call it work, but I'm just driven by it. I love doing it. I don't really need to take a day off because the work that I do current day is so energetic, and it just fuels me to no end.
Right on. I appreciate you sharing that. Can you share with us your 3 most influential books and why?
So this is hard because I do a lot of reading. I think The Alchemist is certainly top of the list. Great book about around many themes, but certainly purpose. There's one book that we talked about, like in terms of phones and social media, is How to Break Up with Your Phone, which I think is a great book if people want to learn how to have more presence in their life, which I think is fantastic. And a book that I'm profiling actually next month in my Leadership Academy is called Thanks 1,000. Now, it isn't like The Alchemist, but it's a really great book on the power of gratitude. And I think, for us to have the lives that we want, a cornerstone in creating those lives is a practice of gratitude. I'm a big believer of it. I didn't know anything about it before my accident. I discovered it through my recovery. And for me, it's made a fundamental shift in my life.
Can you give us your favorite tech tools, maybe a software you use?
One of my favorites is going to be Thinkific, which is not necessarily an app, but it's the platform for my Leadership Academy, which has allowed me to reach more people with my story. Without Thinkific, I don't think I would be able to actually be in a position to do this.
So I want to ask you my favorite question of the show. It's called the Park Bench Paradigm. It's all about, if you could go back in time, what would you tell your younger self and why? So I'll set up this scenario for you. Let's say you're in your early, mid-20s, going through a really rough time in your life, or maybe just a restless time of not being sure what's going to happen next, not being sure like if you're going to be successful or not and what that's going to look like. And you're walking in this park, you see yourself in DC sitting on the bench, and your present day Michael walking, going through all the things you've been through, turning tragedy into triumph, going through your traumatic events with your accident and your recovery. What would you do if you could sit down and put your arm around your own shoulder? What would you say using the pronoun you?
Well, I'm going to give you 2 answers because I was waiting for this question. One is going to be more philosophical, and the other one's going to be really practical for your listeners.
Go for it.
The philosophical one is, Michael, you need to start breathing more. You need to pause. Make sure you pause as you keep pedaling. And the reason why I say that is that I think the power of the pause, the power connecting with our breath, gives us a chance to be aware of how we're showing up in the world. And I wasn't doing that in my early 20s. I was just doing. And I wasn't being mindful of that. So that's some of the advice I would give my younger self. The really practical stuff that I didn't pay any attention to, but now you fast forward 25 years, we're dealing with our parents being older, and their care as they get into senior living. I would say, Michael, you need to have a conversation with mom and dad about how they want their life to be as they get older, as they get past retirement age. And we tend not to have this conversation, right? Because it's like there's a lot into that, as far as mortality and finances and all this. And I never had that conversation. We are now having it now. And it's harder now. There's just more tension. There's more drama, if you will. It just makes for a tougher conversation. So I would share with my younger version to say, you really need to talk to your dad. You need to talk to your mom about what they see for their future and have that conversation, even though they may not necessarily have all the answers. At least start the conversation so you can get some of the weirdness of it out of the way, so you can be there for them in the way they want you to be there for them.
That's impactful. That's very practical and very honest. I appreciate you sharing that.
No problem.
Michael O'Brien, thank you so much for being on the show today. Before we go, guys, definitely want you to check out his book, Shift. You want to read this if you are in an area of your life where you're working through maybe a time of depression or a time of working through a traumatic event, You can get that on Amazon. That's Shift, Creating Better Tomorrows, Winning at Work and in Life. And Michael, is there anything you're working on currently? Anything exciting you, getting you out of bed? Any projects?
Oh, absolutely. So the best way to reach me is through my website, which is michaelobrienshift.com. There they can sign up for my weekly blog, which is called The Shift Tip, where I share ways for the members of my little Peloton to, create the lives that they want, to create the careers that they want. And coming up, here in a few months, I'm going to open up enrollment again to my leadership academy, which is called the Paceline. And this is perfect for anyone in the middle of their career, the aspiring leader who wants to make it maybe to the next rung of the ladder.
And I appreciate you being on the show, and I appreciate your time, Michael. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. It was awesome to connect. I really enjoyed it. And thank you so much for sharing my story.
Congratulations on making it to the end of this episode. What about this episode stood out to you? Next, I need your help sharing this show. I want this podcast to impact and reach 6,000 people per episode by August 31st, 2019. And I want us to reach 15,000 people per month by March 29th, 2020. Have you been enjoying multiple episodes of The Heart Healthy Hustle? I'm thrilled to share with you an exclusive invitation to join our new Facebook community. To get to know other Heart Healthy Hustlers, simply go to thehearthealthyhustle.com/Facebook, where you can expect to see different members of our community being featured weekly in Facebook Live calls. I appreciate all of your love and support, and I will see you in the next episode. As always, be generous on every occasion. There is a story for you, and live wide open.